Hey guys, I thought I'd share something a little different today. I seem to have a problem with vanity and I'm scared to death of doing a video because of how I look, so I'm just going to overcome it and present a video. This is what is going on in my head recently. I tend to have a lot of theological thoughts mulling around in there that I'm always kind of chewing on and thinking over. And so I thought I'd share one with you. It's a bit strange and weird, which might make it interesting. But I've been mulling over circumcision for the past year, 18 months. Have you ever considered why circumcision? It's such a bizarre, barbaric act that God asked the people of Israel to do. Why? Why did God put the foreskin on baby boys and then ask the Jewish nation to cut them off again? That was a famous question asked of the Rabbi Akiva, and I agree with it. What's the point? And then, naturally, because I always think about things from a woman's perspective, what about women? Are women excluded from something because women weren't required to be circumcised, to be a part of God's covenant? And then, how does this affect Christians? Because I'm not Jewish, I am a Christian, and my faith is grounded in Abraham's faith, which is where the Jewish nation's faith was also grounded in. So we have lots of things in common. But Paul clarified that in Christ, circumcision is no longer needed. It's simply the faith. So how does this affect Christians? What is it for women and Christians? And what was it even about in the first place? Well, Genesis 17 is where we first read of circumcision in the Hebrew Bible. And it's when God established a covenant with Abraham. He came to him and he said, hey, I want a relationship with you. And it was a relationship based on a promise, God's promise to Abraham. And Abraham responded by believing what God said. And this was the covenant. And God asked Abraham, not only do I want you to believe what I said, but I want you to circumcise yourself. I want you to take the foreskin off your penis at the age of 99. And Abraham agreed. And God required that not only Abraham be circumcised, but all the males in Abraham's tribe. And from then on, all the descendants from Abraham would be circumcised on the 8th day. And if they weren't circumcised on the 8th day, then they would be excluded. They would be outside the covenant, the realm of the nation of Israel. So circumcision was a sign of this covenant, this relationship of God and the nation of Israel. It was a sign of inclusion. It marked them as Jewish. It marked them as gods. It was a physical representation of a spiritual reality that they had or could have between God and themselves. It's a kind of a weird ritual, but it wasn't unheard of in the ancient world. Many different tribes circumcised. The Hebrews is one of the oldest, but it was not the oldest. They found a picture of a carving in Egypt of some men being circumcised. That was older than, supposedly, than the Hebrew Bible. So they believe that the Egyptians were the first to circumcise themselves. I guess the Egyptians were into purity and cleanliness, and so they think it might have had something to do with that. And I've read before, I don't know where I read it, it was many, many years ago, I read that the ancient version of circumcision was quite a bit different than today's modern surgical procedure. It would have been a lot less taken off, let's put it that way. So it probably wouldn't have been as quite as big of a deal. I realize it would still be a big deal. But it was a smaller procedure. So that's kind of what circumcision is, where it came from, at least in religious practices regarding Jews and Christians. Why? What's the purpose of it? And the rabbis have discussed this quite a bit, because again, it's an odd, kind of an intimate procedure, and so it brought a lot of conversation. And in their midrashes, these are some of the things that they've said might be the reason why God required circumcision of the Jewish males. It was a physical act to symbolize a spiritual reality. And as a Christian, we're familiar with God using physical things that we do to represent things that we can't see in the spiritual realm. Baptism is one of the things that we do as a Christian. We physically immerse ourselves in water or sprinkle with water to represent that that we believe there can be new life after death, and that we can become a new creature with new desires and new habits and new ways of living when we have God as a part of our lives and we claim friendship with him. So it was this physical act to symbolize a spiritual reality, their connection with God. It was also required for them to participate in the covenant with God. This was something that males had to do to be a part of the Jewish nation. And in this sense, it was different for women because women were naturally a part of the Jewish nation. A woman born to a Jewish mother was a Jew. And they even considered boys that were born to Jewish women, regardless if they had a Jewish father, to be a Jew as well. But to confirm that they were Jewish, by the age of 13, they had to have their foreskins cut off. Or at some point, if they grow up and they never did it, they needed to have it done before they could become an official part of Israel. Women were treated differently. So again, it was a physical act to symbolize a spiritual reality. This was a particular phrase that I read. It was a bond etched in flesh. It was a permanent mark that said, I am different. I am set apart for God. And the location of it, being on the penis, which was the fertile organ of the male genitalia, and it symbolized the very center of their life. This is where their children would come from. This would be what would continue them on through their generations. Not only was it the symbol of their life, it was the symbol of the center of their basest desires. Because God required this particular organ to be marked, the rabbis concluded that it had something to say about their sexual purity. In fact, they strongly believed that it was a way for the Jewish men to remember that they are called to be different, that they were called to control themselves, and that they were to bring their earthly desires in line with God's desires. And circumcision wasn't a personal choice. It was for people who converted or people who were not obedient and did not become circumcised on the 8th day. But for the vast majority of Jewish boys, it was not a personal choice. It was something that was done to them to be their identity. And it redefines the Jewish male in terms of the whole nation. So they weren't marking the boy, and this is kind of hard for an American modern viewpoint because we tend to view things so independently, what's good for us. But in an ancient Jewish nationalistic tribal mind, this is what included this boy into the whole family. This redefined them in terms of everyone. It said, you are bigger than the sum of your personal part. You're a part of the whole. And not only the whole of the tribe of people, but the whole of who God is. Circumcision was the male national identity towards God and towards fellow Jews. So it was permanent. It etched it in flesh. It helped them control their sexual desires to refocus on what God wanted them to live like. And it marked the whole nation as a distinct identity, with a distinct identity. So those are some of the ideas that the rabbis have had about the reasons for circumcision. But what about women? Why aren't women invited to permanently commit in flesh a relationship with God? Why was this limited to the man? Why not choose a common organ that both genders could circumcise? Why not the nose, right? Why not the ear? Maybe something visible so that anyone looking at you could say, hey, there's a Jew. Why something so private and so male? Well, some have said because only men can have a bond with God in their flesh. Even in my Christian circles, I kind of got that feeling from teaching was that, oh, look, the men could get circumcised, but you poor women had no way to connect with God, to have a seal of the covenant. So there must be something wrong with women. I don't believe that. And so looking a little deeper, I learned that the rabbi said no, that wasn't the case. It wasn't that men had a greater connection with God through circumcision. It was that the women didn't need it. Now, I got this information from Raquel Holtzkinner, and I hope I said that correctly. And she had a great article called Why Women Don't Need Circumcision, and I'll link that up if you wanted to read. Please read it through yourself. But she lists out some of the midrash that the rabbis have gone through over the years, and they argue that whatever is done to males in circumcision is already present in women. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan said a woman is considered to be naturally circumcised. And this might be connected with why the Jewish lineage is passed through women, because they are the circumcised party. And even if the father was uncircumcised, the circumcision of the woman will pass through her children. Again, this isn't like set down in stone, but you get this kind of feeling from reading through what the rabbis have to say about this. Some rabbis say it's a reminder of sexual purity for men, because women don't need that reminder. Women don't need the reminder to control their sexual desires as much as men do. Now, in today's lingo, we understand that this sexual urge that men have come from testosterone. It's not magically from their private parts. It's a chemical that's pumping through their bodies. It is an established fact that men are the sexual aggressors. There's a very small percentage of women that are offending sexually. The vast majority are men. William Paul Young, who wrote The Shack, I listened to a sermon that he spoke on, and this wasn't about circumcision, but it was about why Jesus had to come as a man. And he believes it's because he came to redeem the worst of humanity. And he lists out all the heinous sexual crimes that have happened throughout history. Sex slaves, strip clubs, pornographic movie industry, adult escort services, and even worse things. Those things weren't created by women to dominate men. They were created by men to dominate women. And so, as much as I hate generalities and stereotypes, especially in the gender realm, this one is based in fact. Because of testosterone, men are more sexually driven to dominate the things that they desire. And that's a direct quote from Raquel, so I want to make sure I give her credit for that. And so the rabbis, hundreds of years ago, looking around them at their natural experience, naturally agreed that women don't need the reminder for sexual purity as much as men do, because they are the natural dominators, the natural aggressors in the sexual realm. And the rabbis also talked about how a woman is naturally circumcised because her organ of sexuality is a place where life is created. And of course, this is the womb. It is a naturally selfless organ, and they would contrast the two, the selfishness of the male parts and the selflessness of the female parts. And so they point to the womb as something that does not need to be circumcised because it is circumcised already. It is already geared toward helping others, towards giving up of itself. Now, the rabbis love to talk about how women need to have babies. I'm not going to get into that because we are in a modern society and women now have a choice to have children or not to have children, to use their womb or not to use their womb. But it is a biological fact that a womb is not created. A womb is inside us and it creates life, unlike any other organ out there in our bodies. A woman shares life for 9 months, and if she has many children, she will do that over and over. And then she will continue to share her life for many years after that, raising children. There is a definite difference, not just in gender stereotypes, but in the natural desires of a woman to raise, to care, to nurture. Not that men don't have it, but it's a general truth. The rabbis recognize that women have a more natural commitment to God, that when you look at Bible study numbers across the board, women Bible studies tend to be more generally filled up than the men's are. They're more well attended. This is just a natural, instinctual understanding that women have, that God is a part of our lives and that he is ever present in our everyday realities. It's easier for them to see. This is what the rabbis have taught. Now, that leaves me with a bunch of questions because, again, I don't like gender stereotypes. I understand testosterone and the chemicals pumping through men that would make them more sexually aggressive than women. Yes, I can see the truth of that. But when it comes to downright saying, do women have more of a propensity to following God than men do? I really struggle with that. And so I'm still mulling that over. And I don't know if circumcision is an answer to that, to say, yes, absolutely, God recognized that there was men needed something else right there to get their attention in the ancient world as he was building a nation of people that would protect his word and protect his reputation throughout the world. Whereas women didn't need that because they had more of a connection to him. I struggle with that, I'll be honest. But that is the direction that the rabbis tend to point to. So as we come to what circumcision means to Christians, it frankly means nothing. The book of Galatians, Paul goes into how there was a group of Jews who believed strongly that Christians, Gentiles, who now believe in the Jewish Messiah, Jesus. Hey, there's my cat. He was against them, and he said what they were teaching was a false gospel, and it shouldn't be listened to. And now she scratches claws on the chair. Buster, beat it. So, Christians and circumcision. There's a great, Paul's whole talk in Galatians on circumcision and the not need for circumcision for Christians culminates kind of with the great egalitarian passage in Galatians 3:28, which says that in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, but we are all one in Christ. Circumcision is not needed. Men do not need to circumcise themselves to be a part of God's family, but we are marked now by the Spirit and by our baptism. And the Spirit now shares his fruit with us, which results in self-control, and hence the sexual purity that circumcision might have been given and designed to help the Jewish men maintain. She's still doing his claws in my chair. And of course, in Christianity, the national identity that the Jewish nation, that circumcision was used as to mark the Jewish nation is no longer needed, because belief in Jesus as the Son of God now pervades all national ties. Anyone and everyone is invited to believe these truths, regardless of what's happening with our bodies. So in conclusion, circumcision was not a way to exclude women from God's promises. In fact, the rabbis taught that it was a special way to keep men in line with God's promises, because women already did that really well. It was a ritual designed to teach sexual purity through national identity with a holy God. And again, it was for Jewish males because the rabbis felt that it was there to keep their mind off their own desires and on what God would desire for them. Still leaves me with some unanswered questions. It's still a really weird thing, and I have a hard time figuring that out still. So if you have any thoughts about what you think it was about, what it does say about women and men, and how it's changed since Jesus the Messiah has come, please let me know. I'd love to hear it.